Well, good morning and welcome to Christ Table. My name is Kevin Young and I have the privilege of serving here at Christ Table as a lead clergy. If you'd like to know more about Christ Table, who we are, what we do, you can visit that URL right there, www.christstable.today. Would encourage you to sign up for the email list there so that you know all of the happenings that's going on around here at Christ Table. Speaking of what's going on around here, this is a new Bible study and we're grateful that you are here and a part of it. If you'd like more information about this Bible study, then you can visit that URL right there in front of me, go.christstable.today/divinecomedy. Now, on that URL, you can download some free resources, a curriculum that goes along with this every day, absolutely free. You can also get a printed copy of that curriculum. It comes in a box that is filled with other resources there as well. So when you go to that URL, all you got to do is click on that button that says get the box. And in that box, you will receive this printed copy of the daily curriculum to walk through all, how many days? I think there are 28. Yeah, 28 days of this study with us. Divine comedy, the wit, the wisdom, the sarcasm, the humor of Jesus that's in his teachings and his journeys through Galilee and Jerusalem there as we walk through different places in the Gospels. One other thing that I want to make sure that you are aware of, if you have not already read this, I want to encourage you, if you are on a journey of deconstruction, if you're on a journey of reconstruction, if you're on a journey away from your faith or Jesus, or you're not sure where you are or what's going on, this book, Reconstruct Your Faith, may well be the perfect resource for you. You can find out more information about it by visiting drkevinyoung.com. And if you have read it and you have not yet written a review of the book on Amazon or on Barnes & Noble, would love for you to do that as well. It helps me out in getting the information out there about the book. Now, let's go ahead and move on to the topic of conversation for today as we begin this study that we're calling Divine Comedy. Some of these passages are going to be familiar to you. Some of these passages that we're going to look at are going to be completely unfamiliar to you. And some of these places that we look, you might be like, I have never thought about that passage being witty or sarcastic or being humorous. And so as we make this journey, I'm really interested in feedback from you in what you've seen, what you've felt, how you feel about all of these things. So make sure to let us know in the comments or the chat, wherever you're watching this, whether you're watching us live or whether you're watching us by delay. We would appreciate that a lot. So today we find ourselves in Matthew chapter 23, verses 23 through 24. So why don't we just go ahead and get started today? So before we jump into our topic text today, what I want to do is actually go back to the Hebrew text in what we refer to as the Old Testament and take a look at a couple of passages that have bearing on our text and Jesus' use of this idea of a gnat and a camel. So if we go back to Leviticus chapter 11, verse 20, we're here in the ceremonial laws that deal with clean and unclean. And so the law here in Leviticus is trying to help people to understand how they remain ceremonially clean and the things that are prohibitive for them, things that are unclean, that God wants them to stay away from. Yahweh. So you must not eat winged insects that walk along the ground. They are detestable to you. Now, if you go on to read in this passage, the following verses, it's going to begin to categorize and separate out different kinds of winged insects are okay, other kinds of winged insects are not okay, and it begins to get very tedious. But for the sake of our understanding today, whenever we look at Jesus, this includes gnats. And gnats sometimes go by other names, fruit flies. I'm sure that there is a very scientific name for gnats, but all that you need to know is that this is a very tiny insect that has wings, that does technically in the eyes of the law here of Moses in the Levitical law, walks on the ground. And so here is the place where we see gnats listed in the Levitical law. So if we go a little bit earlier in this chapter, same chapter, Leviticus chapter 11, we actually see the other point that we need to make before we jump a few thousand years or so forward to Jesus. You may not, however, eat the following animals that have split hooves or that chew the cud, but not both. And then we see it very specifically laid out here. The camel chews the cud, but does not have split hooves. So it is ceremonially unclean for you. So now, having this information at our fingertips, that we now know that gnats, among many other insects, are considered to be unclean, as well as camels, among many other types of animals, are considered to be unclean as well. There are many insects that are considered clean. There are many animals that are considered clean as well. But gnats and camels are listed here as being unclean. So whenever we come to our text for today, Jesus, Matthew chapter 23, verses 23 and 24, Jesus here is having one of many altercations with the religious leaders who, in his eyes, are using the law, the religious law from God as a way, or using it in a way that it was not intended to be utilized, or utilizing it in a way that is placing burdens upon people that should not be placed upon people, or are harming people that God did not want to be harmed. And Jesus is continually kind of pushing against the use of the law and the use of the words of God and the law of God, the law of Moses, in this way. So what sorrow awaits you, teachers of the religious law, and you, and now he specifically calls out the Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are careful to tithe even the tiniest income from your herb gardens, but you ignore the more important aspects of the law, justice and mercy and faith. You should tithe, yes, but do not neglect the more important things. And then he calls them blind guides, which in and of itself is really kind of funny. It's like an oxymoron there placed together in a way, right? Like jumbo shrimp or postal service or military intelligence and Microsoft Works. Like all of these things are things that are kind of opposites put together that sounds humorous if you really think about them. Blind guides. How can a blind person guide somebody else? And this is what Jesus is saying to them. You're setting yourself up as a guide for religion, for God, and you are blind. You strain your water so you won't accidentally swallow a gnat, but you swallow a camel. And there we have it. That would have made people laugh. It is Jesus using wit and humor in order to make a very important and specific point. So, gnat and camel. What's the humor here? Well, the humor, among other possible things, which is the way these words are said and utilized in Hebrew, is also just simply the size of these things. A gnat is very, very small, can get through almost anything. Screen doors, no match for gnats. A camel, not going through a screen door, right? Like a camel, very, very, very large, especially one that is fully drunk. You know, these things are massive, huge animals. Whenever we were in Israel a few years ago, we had an opportunity, if we wanted to ride camels, but even just seeing these beasts up close is amazing. They're enormous. I thought horses were big. Clydesdale horses are big, but camels, wow. And this size difference is the humor that Jesus is getting at here. Because wine in those days had to be strained in order to remove all of the impurities. And also, wine was kept covered so that bugs, gnats, and other things would not get into it. And so they had to be very intentional about the way that they covered and that they sealed their drinking wine in order to keep out gnats. So they had these strainers, these pieces of fabric that they would utilize to strain out any gnats or anything that got in there, and they had to be very, very, very effective. And they would go through all of this hassle in order to make sure that the wine that they drank was absolutely 100% ceremonially clean. Because if a gnat got in to this wine, then the entire batch of wine would be unclean from that point forward. And so it would be useless. And so Jesus is like making a joke here that the amount of time that you spend straining out gnats from your wine so that it remains clean and you don't accidentally ingest a gnat and become unclean, you spend all this time and all of this intentionality into removing something that is so small and then turn around and swallow a camel, which is completely and utterly unclean, just like the gnats that you're spending all this time and intentionality to do. And so Jesus' audience would have roared, both just at the mental image of somebody straining out the smallest impurities that would make something ceremonially unclean, just their tedious work, bent over, spending hours and hours and hours being neurotic about this, and then turning around like swallowing a camel. Just the visual image of that is funny, but also just the joke was in just the sheer overwhelming irony of it all as well, that you're going to spend all of this time and intentionality on this thing and be neurotic about it, while on the other side of things, just whatever. So you're still ceremonially, you're still unclean, and you're swallowing the bigger thing that's making you unclean rather than, and it just, the crowd would have thought that this was hilarious and they would have laughed. And, you know, you imagine almost Jesus probably doing like nonverbal, you know, acting out the religious leaders and the Pharisees who are doing this. And so the point here is something that oftentimes comes up in conversations between Jesus and the Pharisees or the religious leaders. Oftentimes comes up in the Gospels. And we will come back to this several times because Jesus makes this point over and over again, sometimes using very creative imagery. The Pharisees' obsession with minute details while missing the major overarching principles of the Torah was a common theme in Jewish wisdom literature. And so Jesus is just simply kind of piggybacking on this rhetoric that has been long standing before he arrives on the scene. But Jesus takes it to a new and different level. And obviously, for Christians, the voice of Jesus rather than rabbinic literature is our entryway into these conversations, especially here during the first century with Jesus, about people who pay attention to minute details while missing major principles. People who pay attention to the gnats and miss the camels in their lives. It's easy for us to look at the Pharisees or the religious leaders or people whom Jesus had words with and think that that's all them, or that problem or that situation is unique to them, and miss that he's probably talking to us as well. I mean, there were probably people within Jesus' hearing on that day who began to kind of slink back a little bit, probably didn't laugh uproariously at that. They might have chuckled to themselves a little bit, but it hit a little too close to home because they knew that they had things in their life where they would strain out gnats and miss the larger things. And what is it? In fact, I'm going to pull it back up here. Jesus says that they are specifically missing three important things, if I remember correctly. Blind guides, you strain your water so you won't accidentally swallow. Oh, no, a little bit earlier than that. You ignore the more important aspects of the law: justice, mercy, and faith. Even back then, Jesus is reminding people who are trying to legalistically follow a law that there are less important aspects and there are more important aspects of it. We see this today all the time in Christianity, where we see people who are trying to hold other Christians or other non-Christians or the folks around them to this equal standard of legalism, that if you infringe or break one thing, then you're breaking all of them except for the things that I break and I do. So, if you're LGBTQ, or if you're aiding and abetting or enabling somebody who has asked for help, a refugee or an immigrant, or if you help somebody else rather than your family, if you think that just any number of things, right, that Christians say that's the thing, abortion, right, is one of those things that it's like, you hear oftentimes you can't be a Christian if you have a difference of opinion with me on this social issue. You Marxist, you MAGA, you can't be a Christian if you have a difference of opinion than me, because we flatten everything out to one level so that anybody who disagrees with us, we say, well, you're disagreeing with God. And Jesus, she's saying you can't do that. You have focused on some very minor, almost if not completely insignificant law or instruction, and made it as big as the greatest things, the more important things: justice and mercy and faith. And what are the three things that today oftentimes Christians try to make less important than how you think on abortion, LGBTQ, refugees, immigrants, the under-resourced, the treatment of we say that, right, justice and mercy and faith are less important than those things. In fact, there have been several books that have come out in the last year or so about the sin of empathy, of treating people with a mercy mindset. What is all this fanfare about disliking DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion? It's justice, right? Jesus says you're ignoring justice, you're ignoring mercy, you're ignoring faith in order to focus on these little things that don't matter. In God's kingdom, you're focusing on the gnats and you're missing the camels. You're missing the big things. And that is no laughing matter. It's been good to be with you this morning. Looking forward to being back with you tomorrow morning as we continue on this study. And that is not the right slide. This is the right slide. If you'd like more information about the study, or to download those resource materials so that you can journey along with us through these 28 days of divine comedy, then that's where you go. Go.christstable.today/divine comedy. Until tomorrow,